Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today's episode is going to challenge the way you think about healing, about purpose, and true transformation. I'm joined by Jakob Gricar. He's a high performance coach who went from a chronic illness and being homeless to building a thriving business and helping others heal from the inside out. In this episode, we'll dive deep into somatic healing, breaking cycles of shame, and remembering who we truly are. So if you've ever felt stuck, burned out, or just unsure of your next step, then this conversation might be exactly what you need. Let's go ahead and jump in. Hey everybody, welcome back to Born to Climb. Today I am with Jakob Gricar. And Jakob, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I want to ask this first question, and that is, what do most people get wrong when they try to change their life? Maybe it's New Year's Eve, or maybe it's, or maybe they're having some health problems. What do most people get wrong?
What I can say from my own experience and also from coaching hundreds of people, I would say that most people try to solve the problem with the mind. So the problem that hasn't been created in the mind, to try to solve that in the mind often doesn't work. So let's say you're having a desire to change a certain behavior patterns, right? So you go into the mind and you start thinking your way into why this is bad, what could be better, and then just like brute force motivation, trying to break through limited things, right? I would say the reason why that doesn't work is because the body actually remembers something different, and every coping strategy would have its own benefit, right? Every behavior has a positive intent. So when we don't know what's the root cause of the certain behavior or the underlying thought pattern or a certain loop, then we can't really resolve it. We're just kind of dealing with the symptoms all over again. So I would say what people get wrong is really trying to tackle things with the mind, with the thought, with really strong behavioral changes or white knuckling certain habits, instead of looking at why is it that I'm actually doing this? Why am I thinking this way? What are the patterns or the reasons why this thought, this behavior, this habit, whatever it is here in the first place? And only after we can really drop into those root causes of why it's there, can we pull it out at the root as well and start changing that at the very core of it.
Well, this is one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on the show. It's just this idea that, like that book, The Body Keeps Score, that there's so much that goes on the body, and I love the concept of somatic healing. So let's go back in time in your story, though. Where did all this begin? Because this started with you and an illness.
Yeah, when I was about 10 years old, my body started breaking down in many different ways, and I just on the surface had a skin disease, but underlying behind that there was so much that was going on. And it was the crisis of having the skin condition, a skin disease, a chronic skin illness, that really shattered my identity, my self-esteem, my way of being. I had social anxiety, I couldn't sleep, I would scratch myself until I was bleeding. So all of that really forced me to be in my body. So I tried finding all these different ways to numb as a teenager, right? There aren't so many as we have as adults. But I would read fantasy books, I would watch movies, I would try to escape. I also started drinking alcohol at a very young age. In Europe, that's a much more common thing. So kind of like escaping through all these different coping strategies. When I was 13, I encountered a book that was talking about hypnosis and meditation. And I dove into those practices that were there. Because at some point I was like, something needs to change, right? And if this can actually help me, I'll take it. So it was the confrontation of the truth that there is something that is underlying this, that is much more connected to self-love and self-abandonment and self-worth, much more than it was about having the right prescription medicine or a cream, right? So this was the beginning of this path of surrender. And then this pathway of spirituality, of meditation, of hypnosis really gave me a reason to live much beyond survival. It wasn't about believing in something. It was remembering some things that I already knew, and it created this path of really starting to remember, starting to re-educate myself away from the traditional ways of thinking. So I ended up leaving school and traveling the world, and that path led me through all these different experiences, from homelessness to living in the ashrams in India to sitting in plant medicine spaces with indigenous people. And all of those were periods of awakenings, right? But none of that would actually happen if it wasn't for the chronic illness first. So this being forced into the body is now a full circle where I end up working with the body with other people as well.
So when you say that, when you talk about remembering, what is it that you're remembering?
I would say that beyond all of the ideas on all of the themes and topics and all of the things that we're discovering is the remembrance that we are one with God. So I come from the Advaitic philosophy, the non-dual philosophy, right? Which says that if you look at the ocean, it's like a human, a person, a self is like a wave on the ocean. It's a part of the ocean, but it's not separate from the ocean. But when it looks at other waves, it seems like they're all separate waves. But if it goes deep enough, it realizes that at the core, they're all the same. And at the core, they're all the ocean. So this is the pathway to remembering, in my opinion, is coming back to realizing of the self. In Advaita Vedanta, Vedantic philosophy, we say that Tattvamasi, I am that, which speaks to Atman and the Brahman. Atman being the individual soul, and then Brahman being the absolute, the God, however we want to call that, right? So remembering the remembering of self, our soul, our essence, our purpose.
So, Jacob, for those who are listening and they don't really understand what somatic work is or somatic healing, what would be the best way to describe that to everyone so everyone gets it?
Yeah. So somatic, basically what the word means is just working with the body, right? So that's why we have somatic breath work, we have somatic parts work, we have all these different things that have the word somatic in front of them. The way I use the word somatics in this particular context is using the body as a portal to deeper remembering of where the energy is stuck and why. So more from the lens of somatic experiencing, Peter Levine's work. And I was fortunate enough to be mentored by one of the pioneers in this work, Judith Johnson. She's 83 years old, and she's one of the people who was there at the beginning of all of it and has poured her work into me for the last couple of years. And basically what we do in the sessions is we track the sensations in the body. So we pay attention to what the body is really telling us. So we observe. And what I mean by sensations is tension, contraction, even pain. So the pain becomes the messenger of something deeper inside of ourselves. So as we notice something that's stuck in the body, like contraction, tension, pain, then we simply wait and we watch and we observe it. And at some point that tells us a story. And oftentimes that story is a memory that has been suppressed. Or it's a way that the energy couldn't discharge from the body, or the action that couldn't be completed, right? So there's videos that you can find on YouTube as well where a polar bear gets shot by a tranquilizer gun. And as soon as the polar bear starts waking up, it starts shaking. But if we slow down that shaking movement, if we watch it in slow motion, we can see that shaking actually resembles running. So the bear is discharging the movement that couldn't happen because it got tranquilized, which is running away. So oftentimes where the tracking of the sensations in the body leads us is to the discharge or the completion of the action that we couldn't do in that time. And that specifically through the lens of traumatic memories and traumatic imprints, traumatic events can be a really powerful thing because we can get in touch with those core emotions like anger or grief or like really deep fear, right? And only after that gets processed and discharged out of the body, it's no longer stuck in our system, which is what ultimately causes disease.
So here's what I want to know, what you think about this. Let's say someone has to make a big decision in their life. Maybe it's to whether they should stay or leave a relationship or stay or leave in their career, right? So at some point, there's something that's not sitting well with them. They're not quite sure what it is. And they think, maybe I should leave. At the same time, they're wondering, well, what's the best path for me? What's this resistance to leave? Is that fear or is that my intuition? So is someone supposed to sort of filter through these different emotions to know what's just anxiety that we're afraid of making the next step, and what's the soul, in a sense, speaking to us.
Yeah, I love that question, and it's actually one that I hear quite a lot. I would say that the soul is quiet. It's silent. It doesn't have noise around it. So when we become afraid of something, when we start having a big decision and we start overthinking it or being afraid about different aspects of it, or our mind gets like really noisy or loud or crowded, right? I would say that that's normally the imprints that are running the show. And when there's the knowing, like a really deep knowing, like soul knowing, that's often really quiet. It's really still. It's silent. It's just this deep understanding of, oh, okay, there's calm in this decision, right? We can make the same decision, but when there's calm in it, normally it's our real intuition, it's our soul speaking. And when there's noise and crowdedness and fear, that's our traumatic imprints.
So, Jacob, how does somebody learn to get more in touch with that inner voice so that they are really acting in a line with the body versus fighting it?
Yeah, it takes a lot of excavation from my experience. So when we've got all these imprints that are running the show, we can't really learn to like really listen, right? So just what I was answering right now is, what I like to say is that toxic soil bears toxic fruit. So if we don't tend to the soil, if we don't actually nurture that, pull out the weeds at the root, right? Not just cut them. If we actually don't make sure that the soil is fertile, then the fruits that are gonna grow are going to be toxic fruits. So what we do is we focus on the soil, right? We focus on our own inner pathway. We focus on clearing whatever is there, whatever energy is stuck, whatever needs to be discharged, whatever resentments are being held, whatever blame we still have to our ex-partner, to our parents or whatever. And only after all of that is cleared out from our system, including our body, right? Not just at the cognitive level through talk therapy, but through like every part of our being, through our cells, through our body, then we can start acting from that place as well. And then life follows because everything is so much clearer and so much more pure.
You just brought up a word when you said resentment, and I think everybody can relate with that everybody's been hurt by somebody. And so that's a great example of when you get hurt by somebody, and then every time you think of them, there's this the energy is stuck there, right? And what are some of the best techniques for someone to just discharge that energy to deal with that?
Yeah, there's a distinction between what we perceive happened, or in other words, the story that we've created, and what actually happened, right? So most of what we see in life are just the stories that we create about things that have happened. So what I found is one of the most important things is one of the most powerful ways to go about that is separating the facts from the stories. Actually seeing what has actually happened. What did a person say or not say, do or not do? What can we see through a security camera? What can we hear through a microphone? Versus what is the meaning that we created about that? What did we make it mean about ourselves or about the other person or about the world? And then once we distinguish that, then we can see how that story got imprinted into our bodies. And we can trace it all the way back. And normally when there's resentment towards let's say like an ex-partner or a current partner, a husband or wife or whatever, oftentimes I can trace that in the sessions all the way back to a similar relationship with a parent. Because until you clear the relationship with your parents, every relationship will be about your parents. So oftentimes it comes back to that. And what gets to happen in that is the completion process or the discharge looks like reparenting ourselves. So finding a memory where a certain belief got imprinted, or a certain memory or a certain level of like guilt got internalized into shame. And then we create a space either in our imagination or in a real lived, let's call it psychodrama experience, where that energy can fully move through. So if that was us asserting the boundary, then we learn how to properly assert the boundary, saying no or pushing something. If that was the anger release, right, screaming if that needs to happen, or if that was grief, then we just allow ourselves to cry. So this is where, a pop psychology word is, or phrase, is the only way out is through. So this is where that through happens. It's actually being with all the emotions all the way through and all the way until they're done.
Obviously, that doesn't happen when you're driving home and you got 1,000 things on your mind.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So you've had some crazy experiences. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, Along your journey, what has been some of the biggest moments where you were like, oh my goodness, like sort of like your insights or aha moments or something you witnessed where you're like, wow, this stuff is actually even more powerful than I thought?
It's actually, a lot of times it's been quite subtle. I look at my life and I'm like, wow, this is incredible. And sometimes I notice myself in tears because of how far I've come. Because looking back at a poor kid from Slovenia, right, from a small country in the middle of Europe that nobody knows where that is, and growing up in a fairly poor family, and then also going through all these adverse experiences from illness to homelessness, and then looking at myself right now and where my life is right now, I sometimes find myself in like, wow, this is how good it can get. And I get to just really hold myself in that and allow there to be safety in this. Like, yeah, it's real. So it's not, it hasn't been a lot of like really big breakthroughs, but it's been just like this subtle, gradual understanding of like the more I'm working on expanding my capacity to both serve as well as receive, the more things just keep flowing in both ends, right? The more clients are there to serve. The more I focus on serving, the more clients I have to serve. The more I focus on like allowing myself to receive, the more stuff comes to be received. So, you know, moving from being homeless to having a multi-six-figure business to having a lot of different clients and entrepreneur clients that are building massive businesses and people who are connecting me with some of the biggest names in the coaching industry and working with world-renowned coaches and all of that, and looking at that and just being like, wow, this is how good it gets. And there were a few moments on the journey that I was just definitely looking at it and like, wow, this is an interesting experience that I'm having. Especially when I was living in the Amazon jungle, where I would just find myself looking at around me and just being like, wow, this is my reality right now. You know, looking at a very modest housing and the feathers and the colors and being like, wow, is this really my lived experience? And that took a lot of letting go of the identities that I've put there on myself, right? Sometimes we get so stuck in this is who I am and this is what life should look like. And we forget that there's all these different ways of being that can also exist.
I want to talk a little bit more about your time in the Amazon and also your experience with plant medicine, because what I would like to know is, where do you see that coming into someone's story? Or maybe you don't, because I've not asked you about it, but I'd love for you to weigh in on that.
Yeah, something that was one of the biggest things that I've learned from the indigenous tribes is the level of community. So far beyond plant medicine, I think the biggest lesson that we can get from the way they live their lives is the community. And they look at it as trauma is not a problem of the individual, trauma is the problem of the community, right? And they don't see it as something that is pathology, it's just disconnection. They call it a fracturing of the soul. And the healing doesn't happen through words there, it happens through song and chanting and stillness and movement and ceremony and community. And when it comes to plant medicine, I would say those elements are important to be integrated in that, because if not, you're missing a core element of it. And when it comes to plant medicine, a lot of people tend to see that as something that will save them or heal them, which is just another trap. So when plant medicine becomes something that we chase, something outside of ourselves because we're seeking again, we're just engaging in the same behavior as all the coping mechanisms in addiction really are. So we've just chosen a more quote-unquote conscious or spiritual type of addiction, right? So yeah, what I've learned through being in those spaces is really understanding the importance of community, devotion, reverence, ritual. And then as we bring that into plant medicine spaces, that's when it can actually support us. And when we come to it, when we're already ready to do the work and are already doing the work and willing to integrate and not just chase something outside of ourselves to solve all of our issues.
You're the first one to give that perspective of what you notice with the indigenous tribes, just this concept of community, even more so than the plant medicine. You know, sometimes I think, obviously, I live in the United States, I've lived in Canada, and there's almost something about these countries that they are so big that there's a breakdown in community, because it's almost like nowadays, the chances that you're going to raise your kids and then they're all going to be in the same city is just so rare. And, you know, if you live in Seattle and one of your kids is in Miami, I mean, that's a 6-hour flight. I mean, you might be flying to Europe. You think of some of the European countries, that are smaller, where everything on 2 hours by train, at least that's a lot better. I wonder sometimes what impact that has on us as a society, that we're just so spread out from our tribes.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say there's a lot more disconnection in the West, what we call the West, right? As opposed to what I've seen in more of the Eastern cultures and in the Amazon as well, where in the Amazon, it's very much of a hunter space. So when they hunt, they have food. When they catch something, they have food. When they don't catch anything, the whole tribe is without food. So it's like everyone has their roles, and the roles happen within the community. In the West, or the Western countries, USA, Canada, Western Europe, what we've been taught is that one person has to be everything. So we need to be the provider, we need to be the providing for ourselves, and even this like new age feminist movement that is all about like I need to provide everything for myself, I need to be strong, I need to be independent, and for men like needing to be all of it as well. Everybody just needs to be all of it. We just need to be so individuated and sovereign, and it creates a lot of disconnection. Like there's a level of healthy dependency on the community that happens in the traditional spaces, which is there's a person who hunts because they're the best at hunting. There's a person who gathers because they're the best at gathering. There's a person who cooks because they're the best at cooking. There's a person who, in that space, we also go into the indigenous plant medicines, right? Who serves the medicine because they're the most connected to the spirit and to the song. There's a person who heals because they have the understanding of working with the animated world and with the spirit world, right? And each person has its own role, their own role within the tribe and the community, and that healthy dependency within the community is how it all works. So even when something happens and it creates this fracturing of the soul, or what we call trauma, it's not something that needs to be held in and processed alone. It's something that gets brought into the space and processed in the space. And what I found even with working with hundreds of clients is shame goes to die in safe spaces. We get hurt in relationships and we heal in relationships, right? So understanding that like when we bring that to the space, our own traumatic imprint might trigger other people as well, but it causes this beautiful popcorn effect of group healing as well, right? Our going through our own process awakens something in other people as well, so they can be more liberated in going through their own process as well.
Speaking about community and healing, I want to get your perspective on men, because men generally are not as open and vulnerable as women. And is it just that men process things different, or is it that men need to be more open? I know there's that pressure for men, like you got to be more open and vulnerable, or is it that's not really our path? I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but basically, what's the best way for men in community to heal and be healthy?
Yeah, there's definitely a biological thing that happens, right? Definitely think and we're wired differently than women. And as much as I think society right now is wanting to merge the two and create more of these different levels of separation and let's say like distorting, I would say that like just biologically, a lot of men are just more prone to doing and like being in this space of like moving forwards, like achieving, right? We have this outwards like energy of like, and women tend to have a lot more of like this internal world and connection to the invisible and to the subtle. And we look at the cycle as well, right? The male cycle is a 24-hour cycle. The testosterone, like the cortisol spikes, the testosterone goes up. When we wake up, we're productive throughout the first part of the day. Then we start getting tired, then we go to sleep, then we wake up, and we just repeat the same thing through the same mood every single day, right? And for women, it's a lunar cycle. It's not a solar. It goes for 28 days. So like throughout that cycle, things happen in the same way. So there's hormonal changes with the estrogen and the testosterone. So I'd say biologically, we're wired towards like productivity and achieving and outward focus. And we're really missing out on a lot of life because of that. Because there's so much that happens internally as well. So I wouldn't say that men should do something or need to be in a certain way. But I would say that there's a lot more that can be discovered when we allow ourselves to fully be with all the things that are in there. And most of us have been taught not to feel, and not to be angry, and not to be sad, and boys don't cry, right? And all of that stuff. So we learn to suppress the emotional landscape. But I feel like to really get the full contrast and range and the beauty of life, it does require us to be in those spaces as well and learn to be in the sensations and emotions. That opens up so much more in our capacity to be with life as it is and to stop that chase, you know? And then the second thing that I've observed with a lot of my male clients is that there's a identification with utility. So we see our worth based on our utility. If I'm a good provider, then I'm a good man. If I earn enough money, then I'm a good man. If I have a good job, if I etc., then I'm good. Then I'm worthy. Then I'll finally be enough. So that level of like utility is something that is stopping us from just being most of the time. The understanding that we are inherently worthy, that's coming back full circle to remembering, right? We are inherently already here. We just need to remember it and stop identifying our worth with utility. So when that gets broken, that's when I find it can be created through a lot more feeling. That can be broken and fixed and repaired through a lot more of allowing ourselves to feel.
We could have an entire conversation about breaking the program that men have of utility, but we will, that'll be for another conversations for sure, because that programming is deep. Definitely, as I've said to many other people, we are shaped by shame. That's this made sculpting tool when we were kids. But since we only have a couple minutes left, and I'm going to ask you like a really big question, it's probably unfair, but the idea is 3 things I want you to weigh in on and how they fit with us being psychologically, emotionally, spiritually healthy. And they are
Okay, let's go.
breath work, movement of the body, whether that's tapping or whatever, and body work, movement of the body. So where do those things fall into somebody going through a healing process?
Yeah, beautiful. 3 of my favorite things, I'd say. They can come in different stages, or they could come all at once. I would say breathwork is our interaction with the outside world, and it's also our connection between the conscious and the subconscious mind. If we look at how we breathe, most of the time is unconsciously, right? So when we do it consciously, it allows more of a space to regulate ourselves. And there's different types of breath work. And when we say breath work, majority of the people assume like very rigorous, like holotropic style, cathartic breath, which is one form of moving into the sympathetic state, which is when we activate the sympathetic state, that's really powerful way to like bring up stuff on the surface, right? The other form of breath work would be moving towards the parasympathetic, which are the 4-7-8 breath or the box breathing. So with breath, we can really learn to regulate our autonomic states. So moving either into sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. Meditation, I would say, is for the awareness of our patterns, because you can't change something that you're not aware of. So if we run on autopilot and we say that most of the thoughts, I don't know exactly how they measure that, but it's said that we have 40,000 thoughts a day, and that about 95% of them are repeating from yesterday. So if all of the thoughts are pretty much repeating day after day, all the patterns and the loops and the triggers that are stuck in the body as well are also repeating, because unless we discharge or complete the experience, then it stays stuck in the body keeps the score, right? So if all of that is repeating, what does it actually take to break that? And the first step is always awareness. Unless we're aware that the pattern is happening, we can't do anything about it. And what I find is meditation creates that little gap where we don't immediately react to the trigger, but we allow just a little bit of space and pause to acknowledge the pattern that is there. And that when that pause becomes longer and longer, that's when we actually get to change something and break the pattern. And then when it comes to the movement of the body, that's where a lot of alchemy can happen. Because if you're able to trace something that is happening inside of the body, and then you're able to move through it, that can automatically liberate it and release it. Again, like the example of the polar bear shaking, right? Shaking is natural response that happens in pretty much all animal kingdom. So as soon as there's a traumatic thing, something energy that gets trapped in the body, there's a discharge of that energy. So the movement gets to happen, but it can again happen unconsciously. For a majority of the people, it's just something that keeps being stuck in the body. Or we can do it consciously. So when we do it consciously, even dance can become the liberation and the alchemy, where we transmute some energy that's stuck in our body and then allow it to move and have the expression through however we want it to.
That's fantastic. I got one last question for you. In all the work you've done, what's the best way for us to get a message into our subconscious, right? So our subconscious maybe has this early belief and it's just running on that program. How do we communicate with the subconscious so that it listens?
Intensity and repetition, those two. If we look at how do we learn most of the beliefs that we've learned, I'll speak for myself. Through my childhood, I was taught that things cost a lot of money and that we can't afford that. So how did I learn that? Is I kept being told, oh, we can't afford that. And I was told that when it was the things I wanted the most. I wanted a toy, I wanted certain types of food. Oh, we can't afford that. So that created a lot of like intense emotions inside of me, right? The grief and anger and pain and like feelings of injustice, right? Like, why do other people have it and I don't, and stuff like that. So that the repetition of the word with the strong emotion is how that got ingrained into my psyche. Oh, I can't afford that. I'm poor. I don't have enough money. So the rewiring of that has to be the same, right? So it's the repetition and the intensity. So we can create that either through like just creating identity statements and reading that, or through prayer. Prayer works for a lot of people. And through gratitude journaling. However that works for an individual, I never say like this is exactly how it should look like to any of my clients. I just give them different tools and then they can play and experiment with them. And the ones who stick are the ones that they, keep going with. But it's the intensity and the repetition. So the more we do it, while we're feeling the new emotions that we want to feel. So gratitude for how good life can get. That's something I was sharing in the beginning of the call too, like, oh wow, this is how good it can get. And I remind myself all the time, every day, thank you God for everything that you brought into my life. Thank you. Wow, I'm so grateful for this. I'm so grateful for that. For every new client, wow, thank you God for blessing me with this. And again, it can be your own wording if the word God triggers you. But it's this element of like gratitude, like intense, passionate gratitude, but then repeating it also all the time. Wow, I have all this money, I have all this abundance. And it's not repeating it from a place where, I'm just looking myself at the mirror and just saying the words that don't mean anything. It's actually going out there and like taking action and then seeing results of the action, focusing on the roots, not chasing the fruits, and then watching the fruits come as I focus on like the nurturing of the soil. And then as that happens, I'm just like, wow, thank you for this, thank you for that, thank you for more. And even when the pain comes, it's like, wow, thank you for the opportunity to practice what I said that I know. Thank you for the opportunity to feel all of my grief right now. Thank you for all the pain, because it's challenging me to become that next version of me, because it's building out my character. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then when you live in that thank you, basically that's when it starts rewiring. Everything starts rewiring. And then more of what you're asking for comes in.
Well, speaking of thank you for taking the time and sharing with us just a small part of your journey today. And it was really inspiring just to hear you. You're a breath of fresh air when there's a lot of people out there that are just, push, grind, and it's a little bit shame-based. And not saying it doesn't work at different times, but I love that you've gone deeper and understood that there are needs of the body and there are needs of the soul. So, Jakob, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
The best way would be just reach out to me on Instagram. It's Jakob Gricar, so JAKOBGRICAR. And feel free to shoot me a message, and don't be a stranger. Just reach out and say, hey, I listened to a podcast with James and I'd love to connect. I got really inspired. And the second thing is I also rolled out a private podcast where I share some behind the scenes insights from building a multi-six-figure business, coaching hundreds of people in the somatics world through high performance coaching, and just some of my own unfiltered, unedited clips that are like voice messages directly from me a couple of times per week.
Fantastic. Well, Jakob, make sure you get me all those links. Those will all be in the show notes. So if you're listening and you don't have anything to write down with right now, just go to jamesrobbins.com/podcast. Look for this episode with Jakob Gricar in it, and you'll find all the links there. Jakob, thanks again. And it's really great to meet you. I know you're doing a lot of great work. and you're helping a lot of people. So keep it up, brother. And thanks for being on Born to Climb.
Thank you so much for having me, James. It's been an absolute honor.